Now to the controversy over spying here in the United States. A new book out this week is offering more insight into just how the secret plan came about, and it's sure to raise even more questions about presidential power. We'll talk with the author in just a moment, but first, here's NBC's justice correspondent, Pete Williams.
After holding the story for a year, the New York Times reported in mid-December that the Bush administration secretly authorized the National Security Agency to monitor overseas phone calls to and from the U.S. made by suspected al-Qaeda associates. That included listening in on the phone calls of some Americans without a court order. Just last weekend, the president defended the secret program as critical to preventing more terror attacks.
It seems logical to me.
Bush authorized domestic...
The disclosure touched off a nationwide debate, with many Democrats saying it's illegal.
This warrantless eavesdropping program is not authorized by the Patriot Act. It's not authorized by any act of Congress, and it's not overseen by any court.
The Justice Department last week launched a criminal investigation into who leaked word of the program's existence. The Times said its story came from nearly a dozen current and former government officials concerned about the operation's legality. Meantime, members of the Senate in both parties are planning hearings to ask, is the monitoring illegal, or does the Constitution give the president the authority to order it? For today, Pete Williams, NBC News, Washington.
Jim Risen broke the NSA spying story for the New York Times. He is also the author of that book out this week called State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration. He is here with us for his first interview. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you. I know that you broke the story, as we mentioned, for the New York Times. Why do you think the people who talked about this secret program came forward and told you about it?
Well, you know, I think this was the most classic whistleblower case I've ever seen, where people, you know, in a lot of stories, people have mixed motives for why they talk to reporters. Some people, in some stories, there's a turf battle and they're losing out in a turf battle or whatever. In this case, I've been a reporter for about 25 years. This was the purest case of whistleblowers coming forward, people who truly believed that there was something wrong going on in the government, and they were motivated, I believe, by the purest reasons to come forward.
But many critics have already alleged that they believe that your sources had serious axes to grind. Why are you so convinced otherwise?
Because I've talked to these people, and many of them were tormented by their knowledge of this. They truly believed that they were troubled by the fact that they knew that they thought something was wrong in the government, and they came forward, I believe, simply to make the public aware of this.
What specifically was upsetting to them about this whole policy?
Well, many of these people had grown up in the environment of knowing that in order to listen in on Americans, you had to get a court order. And they saw that something was happening in which that was not being done, that the courts were being skirted, that Congress, that the laws had not been changed. And they believed that, for whatever reason, the Bush administration was skirting the law.
Did they acknowledge that tough times may call for tough measures?
Oh, absolutely. These are people who are involved in that day to day, who have been involved in counterterrorism and who know this kind of issue intimately. But they believe that many of these people, at least they told me, they came to us because they thought you have to follow the rules and you have to follow the law.
The public editor, or the ombudsman of the New York Times, was quite critical of your paper for its explanation of holding the story for a year and then publishing it recently, calling the explanation woefully inadequate. Why did you hold the story for a year, and why then publish it now?
Well, it wasn't my decision on when to publish the story.
But clearly you were involved in the discussions.
Well, I've agreed with the paper not to discuss the internal deliberations, but I can say that I think it was a great public service to publish it, because I think now we have a public debate, which I think is far more important, the substance of this NSA story.
Did you know about this before the election?
I can't really, as I said, I can't really get into the deliberations at the paper.
As you know, your revelations have caused the CIA to launch a formal investigation, or ask the Justice Department to launch a formal investigation. Are you concerned that you're going to have to reveal your sources to a grand jury?
Well, I hope not. I think that at this point, these people came forward for the best reasons. This is, in my opinion, the complete opposite of the Plame case. These are people who came forward in order to tell the American people the truth as they saw it, and I think they were truly American patriots.
Let's talk about some of the content of your book, which you have some very interesting revelations and a lot of different ones. One is that the president expressed concern that an Al-Qaeda member who was in custody received pain medication. He said, who authorized that? You suggest that this might be the precursor to torture being used. Isn't that kind of a big leap?
Well, I say in the book that there's a dispute about exactly what happened. I've said that one very good source who I've trusted for many years told me about the existence of that conversation between Bush and George Tenet, then the CIA director, in which they were discussing Abu Zubaydah, who was the first major Al-Qaeda figure to be captured. He had been wounded during the capture, and he was receiving medication. What I was told was that the president asked Tenet who authorized giving him pain medication. Other people, I say in the book, have said they've never heard about that. But the question really goes to, how did the message get sent to the CIA over a period of several months that we have to get tough with prisoners? Because eventually we saw the creation of a whole regime of harsh interrogation tactics that began at the CIA and then, as we saw, ended up at Abu Ghraib in Iraq with the military. And so there's a question of what were the origins of the interrogation techniques that were used in the War on Terror.
You also have a fascinating story, Jim, about people who were dispatched from this country, including an anesthesiologist from Ohio, who had relatives in Iraq, to try to ascertain, one last-ditch effort to ascertain if weapons of mass destruction were being used or being developed in Iraq.
This nice woman from Cleveland who was an Iraqi American immigrant, she and her husband had escaped from Iraq in the 70s. Her brother was still in Iraq as he had been a nuclear scientist. He had been involved in the nuclear weapons program of Saddam Hussein in the 80s and early 90s until the program had been abandoned. In 2002, the CIA asked her to go back to Baghdad and talk to her brother to see if there was still a nuclear weapons program. She went back to Baghdad and asked him a series of questions, and he looked at her basically like, you're crazy, we haven't had a nuclear program in 10 years.
And in fact, he claimed that the nuclear weapons, or the WMD, had been destroyed during the first Gulf War during a bombing spree,
yes,
right?
And then it had been abandoned right after the war.
So they came back and reported what they had found. How many people, by the way, were dispatched in all?
Roughly 30.
So they came back, they reported that there were no weapons of mass destruction. Were they listened to? No,
they were basically ignored. In fact, the CIA believed, they came to believe that, well, these people are just being told what these guys, are being ordered by Saddam to say, that this is disinformation, and so they ignored it.
Meanwhile, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, George Tenet do not come across very well in this book.
Well, I think that during a period from about 2000, from 9/11 through the beginning of the Gulf of the war in Iraq, I think what happened was the checks and balances that normally keep American foreign policy and national security policy towards the center kind of broke down, and you had more of a radicalization of American foreign policy in which the career professionals were not really given a chance to kind of forge a consensus within the administration. And so you had the principals, Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Tenet, and Rice, and many others, who were meeting constantly, setting policy, and really never allowed the people who understand, the experts who understand the region, to have much of a say.
You suggest there were a lot of power grabbing going on.
Yes.
Well, the book is called State of War, Jim Rising. Good luck with it. Thanks so much for coming on this morning.